Our next guest is John Morris. John is the K-12 Science Coordinator for Chelmsford Public Schools. Thank you for joining me, John.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm looking forward to our discussion. I sort of poked a little fun of you at the beginning of the show and I said we'd be talking about pond scum. But I think what we're going to talk about something pretty critical in our community, and that is Science Pond near Chelmsford High School that you are using as a living, learning classroom for the students at Chelmsford High School. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Science Pond?
So this is a project that we undertook or began undertaking last year. It was two students, Sona Hanslia and Alicia Pariseau, who really spearheaded this effort. They were in Science National Honor Society and they wanted to also contribute something to further science education in Chelmsford. With a lot of support from Dr. Lang, we were actually able to look at the Science Pond, which is what we call it, which is actually right, call it like a courtyard area of the high school. And tremendous amount of work went in. We cleaned up this area in terms of the overgrowth that was around the pond, but also creating access to the pond. And the primary reason for that was to give students not just lab experiences in the classroom, which we do a phenomenal job with, that our staff does, but have something that we could actually go outside and see this in real life right here in front of us.
So was it always a pond that got cleaned up, or what was the original, how did this pond get to be where it is?
So my understanding is that when Chelmsford High School was built in the 70s, was that this was a controlled overflow area.
Overflow from the parking lot?
Yep, but there was also a wish that we would have a science pond for the teachers. There was original intent to have a living area. Fast forward many years, it's been the subject of many different senior pranks. It's been the subject of
any you want to share?
Nope, none that I take responsibility for, that's for sure. But also, it has been used in the past sporadically by science teachers, but we saw this as an opportunity to say, hey, you know, this is a great body of water with us. How can we actually see what are the positive effects by cleaning this up and making it more accessible? What can that actually do, not just for the student access and student abilities, but what does this do to the ecosystem around it as well?
So the ecosystem, we saw a picture of the pond. How big is it?
The pond is about 60 by 40 feet, about 60, 70 feet long, 40 feet wide. And
about how deep?
So if you were to go out and just measure right to the center, you'd only look about 3 or 4 feet, but there's been so much runoff over the years, other vegetation, that you'll actually sink down a couple feet, even more so. I'm not going to prove this, but we do have experiences where even the first couple feet you walk in, you can sink as much as 2 feet just through the muck.
Wow, so you have experience kind of pulling
Yes.
people out.
Yes.
So these two students got this cleanup underway. They felt like there was a really good resource for the school, and you've really been doing some work around there. In the photo we saw there's a greenhouse on the property. You said you planted some blueberry bushes to help stop the erosion.
Yep.
And my favorite part of it is the observation deck.
Yes, so there's been several different projects that are going on around the pond. I think getting the area cleaned up was stage one, and then how can we really make this a space that can have so many different opportunities outside of that. The blueberry bushes were there to help with the erosion on that hill that over the years has been somewhat of a problem. And then part of that, you want to have more pollinators to be around the pond. So this year we actually had our preschool students plant pollinators and raised beds around the pond with one of our science teachers, which was an awesome experience to watch. And then the greenhouse was also built to try and look at how can we extend the growing season in our area. And that was also through a capital skills grant, which is to further life science pathways education in the Chelmsford school system.
Wow, so there's so many different students learning many different things just from this one little pond.
Yes.
I think you've been working with a professor from UMass Lowell who's a wetlands expert to...
Yeah, so we got some feedback from there. We also had feedback from Chelmsford Conservation. We also worked with the state to ensure that the work we were going to do was appropriate. So I think one of the nice things about this process is that the two students who wanted to look at this and say, how can we further education, actually got a phenomenal education themselves. They learned that if you're going to do anything outside to change it dramatically, there's a huge process that goes with this. So they learned so much just from the environmental side, the legal side, the public work side. So for them, and they'll even tell us from a feedback perspective, they learned so much just to help out.
So My favorite quote from you about this science pond is that you're calling it a liquid textbook.
Yep.
It's an outdoor classroom with a liquid textbook, and that's really great. We have pictures of the students wearing waders. I understand you bought about 15 pairs of these waders so that they can actually go into the pond. I mean, look at that. That is really hands-on learning.
Yeah, and the nice part about that is that we have, it's been a range. We've had freshmen who were actually in there last week. Sophomores, seniors have been in that water. And I think the way we look at it is there's ways to get authentic data. We can have water that would be taken from the pond and look at this in the classroom. But to take the ownership to go out and get this themselves, or to go out and do observations right there. I mean, some of the field work that happens in environmental specialists, this is part of what they have to do. So giving students this access and this experience right now really gives them a taste of what this could look like beyond here.
So a lot of your classes use this pond for their coursework, environmental science and biology.
Correct. And then we're also looking at how chemistry can use this as well. So the water samples that we do get, how can we actually look at the current activities we have and transform it to look at a water quality aspect?
Oh, it's really amazing. It's like this big puddle, and yet it's contributing to so much of the kids' education, even the preschoolers who go out on that observation deck. And I love that it's right at the school. I remember when my kids were in elementary school, getting onto the school bus, driving 4 towns away, getting off and doing those water science experiments, you know, and then taking the information back to the school. But your kids are really right there doing it.
And we do have a senior class who does go over to Crooked Spring, and this was also another way to look at, that's a natural environment. So now what can we look at as a quote unquote man-made environment? What can we assess? The other really important thing, I know you mentioned the observation deck. For students to have accessibility to the water, we wanted to make sure that we had full accessibility. So that deck, the purpose behind that, it's a great feature. Our pre-K kids can go out, walk out, look at the water as well, but anybody has access right to the water's edge, which is a fantastic attribute that we had support for.
So we have a video of what is actually inside the pond, and I found it fascinating, and then talking to you before the show, it's even more fascinating. So let's just take a look at what's in the water right now. Not quite pond scum, but you know, leaves and sticks, and what else are you seeing here?
So what's really unique about this video is that this was actually captured because of work done by our robotics students. So we actually had underwater rover kits that we had robotic students assemble, and then we found a way to have the right buoyancy to ensure that the depth was going to be appropriate for an underwater camera to be mounted. So we actually got footage of the water with something that students built. Full disclosure, we were actually chasing fish around while we were trying to get this video. Those that know me know that it's not a surprise for me. But if you also notice about that video, you look at the clarity of that water. We're actually planning in the next couple weeks to go back in with another camera to get footage. That footage was about a year ago that we took it. So it's going to be really interesting to see that change in footage.
Are you anticipating change?
We are, and I think just what's really unique about this spring, the ability, we've talked about this as a department, to be able to walk around the water's edge and just see how clear the water is this year compared to last year. We actually do see a difference.
And this difference comes from?
So we think it's from a couple factors. I definitely think that the erosion control that we put around with the landscaping work last year is part of it, but also the paving work that was done up on the higher elevation that drains down. There could be some positive effects from that and how that's controlled, and how the water that does come in tends to ride the edge of the pond before it gets to the drain. So you don't have as much sediment circulation within the middle of the water.
So as the K-12 Science Coordinator, it sounds like you have really captured a lot of students and a lot of different segments of our school community to get a lot from this pond. Do you have future plans for this pond? Any other ideas of what you might do with it?
Yeah, we do. So there's actually a project that a few students came to me with last year. They were looking to try and harness the water from an irrigation perspective. So they actually developed, we're actually looking to test it next week, a solar-powered drip irrigation system which would take care of the raised beds around the pond. So the great part about that, it's student-led, student-designed, and it's going to be student-executed, where they actually have to figure out, we don't want to drain the pond by watering everything, but how can we create a system that is just hands-free? And it's also a full green project with the solar power.
Wow. Wow, that's really amazing. So it is a tranquil setting with this vibrant life going on inside. Have you you said you were chasing fish. What kinds of fish are in there?
So we have noticed a little bit of an increase in fish this year. Don't know for sure if it's the like a sunfish or bluegill, pumpkin seed that are in. There's always frogs. Some of them are much bigger than others. There's a muskrat that's in there this year who's building a nice little home for himself. We've seen the ducks have come back. One of the unique things that I noticed last summer was that the hawks have come back as well, because for them, as much as we have this wildlife, this is also breakfast, lunch, and dinner that can pop up. So there's definitely more of an abundance of life. And we're actually hoping to capture what life could get near the pond or come away from it, because part of the capital skills grant I had just mentioned to you, we have trail cameras that will be set all throughout McCarthy, Parker, and Chelmsford High School to capture the wildlife around the area as well.
Wow. Wow, I'm glad you are growing things in the pond and you're growing the minds of our students. Thank you so much, John. It was really a pleasure to talk to you about Chelmsford High School Science Pond.
Thanks for having me.
And that's our show for tonight. Thank you for joining me. I want to thank my crew, Karen and Bob and Dee, and it's been a very interesting show, and I hope everybody learned a lot. And many thanks to Pete, who did not bring his trumpet to play us out, but have a good night.